Hello. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Namaskar. So we can start with questions and then discuss, and at the end we can sit quietly and meditate for a while. Yeah. And I'm think you're aware that more than the talk, it is something else that is more important, more than words. So anyway, so let's start.
Okay. You all made it happen that we have this beautiful meeting today. So first of all, thank you. Thanks a lot to Sriyam who made it all possible. Thanks a lot for that. And also thanks for joining. We have two great teachers today. Jan, of course. Hello, Jan. And Sriyam and a lot of other beautiful beings that are also here. I thought I will just introduce, I guess you don't really need the introduction, dear Sriyam, but I will just pick some, the best introduction in a way, just for some of you who maybe didn't read the book. So Sriyam, born in Tiruvananthapuram, guide, social reformer, and educationist. In 2011, he wrote his memoir, Apprenticed to a Himalayan Master, a yogi's autobiography, which became an instant bestseller. The sequel, The Journey Continues, was published in 2017, and his novel Shunya was published in 2018 and is a national bestseller. On meditation, in case someone is interested, you can have a look. So, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. I will just proceed to the questions.
Please.
Started, so to speak. So, okay. Once the silver Kundalini enters the spine and rises until it finally dissolves into pure light and merges with the brain, does that in itself confer enlightenment? If so, to what degree? And is it reversible?
The last question to answer, I start with the last question. Is it reversible? If it's really a Kundalini awakening, no one would want to reverse it, because it's not just as if, I'm saying from my understanding. I may be wrong, I may be right, I'm saying what I know, okay? Now, the very fact that there is an energy, nowadays I generally don't use the word Kundalini many times, I just call it Shakti or energy. Because nowadays this Kundalini has become a big business. You can pay $1,000 and raise your Kundalini. And here we work hard all our lives and nothing is happening. I mean, something happens, but so I try not to use the term. But it is energy, of course. And let me come to this. When you say Shakti, it means ultimate, universal, primordial energy. All the energies that we find on this earth are also part of that. It's a manifestation of that energy. Now, in the human frame, in the human being, this tremendous energy, after having done its work of making a complete human being, resides quietly, without acting actually, at the bottom of the spine in a center which we call the Mooladhara. Now, Moola Adhara means Moola is root and Adhara is foundation. So it's a root foundation. So there it resides for all, man or woman, young or old. It's a common factor. The only difference is for some, it's partially awakened. For some, it's little more awakened or active. And some deliberately during doing some practices actually make it possible for it to develop and awaken. So there are roughly three categories. If you see a great scientist or a a great artist, or a great musician who is not practicing Kundalini Yoga, but who seems so inspired that all his work is creative. This means spontaneously there has been some kind of a slight awakening of the Kundalini, of the Shakti. Okay, we'll say Kundalini, doesn't matter. Kundalini. In some cases, it may be more in some people, without any effort. But when somebody practices sadhanas and disciplines, which includes the yoga tantras and the practices of yoga tantra and the mantrayana, that means the practice of the mantra section, which includes the images which we call Sri Yantra and the mandalas and chakras and so on. When someone deliberately begins to practice it, then with a great deal of practice, with of course help from someone who has already awakened Kundalini, the movement takes place from center to center, from the Muladhara through the Sushumna. I'm not naming all the centers, well, it is no harm. So from Muladhara to Swadhisthana, Swadhisthana to Manipura, Manipura to Anahat, from Anahat to Vishuddha, from Vishuddha to Ajna, and from Ajna to Sahasrara. Right. So this can happen step by step with proper training and with proper guidance. But if it happens suddenly, without going step by step, and before the channel has been purified, then there are also some side effects possible, and the person may not be in control of it, so that it may not be possible for them to move it up and down at their will. But a yogi is one who practices regularly, who practices for many years. Depends. Suppose in his past life is already done, then it may take a few minutes. You can't judge the time and say it will take this much time. So if anybody says, I can awaken your Kundalini in 6 weeks, run away, because it can't be. Nobody knows how long it takes or how short it takes. Not possible. So when this happens, then the Kundalini goes to the Sahasrara, which is the, well, physiologically it's the brain, but it's much more than that. Then the person has access to wisdom, which normally is not possible for the person to acquire, even if he reads 1,000 books for 1,000 years. Not only wisdom, it's also accompanied by ecstasy, and greater dimensions open up for the yogi. He sees not only this world, but there are subtle realms which are visible and seen and which can be felt. Most of all, when it reaches Sahasrara, the satisfaction and the enjoyment is so much that the yogi really doesn't crave for anything else. So in that case, the question of reversal does not arise. So who would want to reverse a process where you have come across tons of wealth in your hands? Nobody would want to do that. If by reversal it is meant that can one control it consciously and make it go up and come down at will, yes, this is possible. But when I say reversible, when you use the word reversible, it becomes a little different. It means you don't want the process, you want to go out of it. Right? Who would want to go out of something so wonderful? So that question doesn't arise. But yes, a yogi can consciously take it up and take it down at will. And even for those for whom it is awakened, it does not always stay up. It also comes down and works through other chakras or other centers for various reasons and at different times. I hope I have discussed the question as much as I could. Can we go to the next question? I know this is food for thought, so there may be still some unanswered elements. We'll work on that So can we go to the next question?
The next question is, does have an endpoint, or is it an endless flowering and growth even after self-realization?
This is a good question. Few people ask this question. I don't know who has asked this question. The question is beautiful. Is it an endless flowering even after self-realization? Now, there are 2 points here. We'll take it one by one. One is flowering unconditionally. 2 is self-realization. 2 words. Let's start with self-realization. This word is loaded because there are people who sit upon judgment. Oh, this person is self-realized. That person is self-realized. I'm self-realized. To me, it appears that if someone really has understood the real self, not the self-M, what is seen on the screen, this is a self which is here today and it may go off in a few years, it won't be here anymore. So many people have come and gone, including the great Jesus Christ. We think he was a yogi par excellence. Okay, so this can happen physically, yes. One can come and one can go. But the self, if you're talking about the inner essence as the self, to understand that one is that self automatically is an unconditioning. Because we are conditioned to the thought that we are this self that is seen, with all its likes and dislikes, pains and sorrows and pleasures, family, this, how the self we create. One self is created physically during birth. Another self is psychologically created as we grow. And both of them interact. So we have a self which we think is the self, but it's not the real self. This is the self that we have created. Okay. Now, the first step I would say is to understand that this is an illusion, that this is the self. This may not, at least you can say this may not be the real self. We can start with that point. We need not say it is not, because we don't know, but say maybe this is not the self. Maybe there is an inner self which is more than all these things put together. Maybe it is unborn. Maybe it never dies. People have said that before, but we can at least have it as a hypothesis. What's a hypothesis? Somebody has seen something and he says it is like this. I say I haven't seen it, so therefore for me it's a hypothesis. And then I have to work to form the picture and then declare, yes, it is so or it is not so. There is the Pythagoras theorem. It's a hypothesis. The theorem is that you add the square of the base and the square of the height and you get the square of the hypotenuse. This is the theory, Pythagoras theorem. How do I know it? Only when I sit down and take my set square. What is it? What are set squares called? Any Freemasons around? Instruments of the trade. When I pick up my instruments of my trade and then I draw the actual figure, then I prove it. Then I say yes, hypothesis. So let's start with the hypothesis that the self which I think is myself may not be myself. It may be something else. Start. And then look at how this self is so conditioned and begin to remove the conditionings one by one. At least one of the ways to remove is to see that one is conditioned first. Otherwise, why would one remove the conditionings? Right. When this is done, now, since we talked about the Kundalini in the first instance, the actual awakening and movement of this energy is also an unconditioning of this little self. When it reaches the Sahasrara, this little self is blasted into pieces and there is only the real self. So, if this is understood, and experienced. Now, experience is a difficult word to say, because normally when we say experience, our little self, which we think is the true self, is experiencing something. Here, the little self does not remain to experience. There is only that. So you cannot use the same term as when you experience, say, a cup of tea or a good beer. That because there is an experiencer here. In this case, the experiencer is completely gone. There is only that which is the higher self. Now, if you say, if you don't experience it, how do you know? Well, I see the whole world, I see you all with my eyes. But I can't see my own eyes. And the mirror I see, but that's an image. I can't turn around and look at my own eyes. But because I see you, I know that I have eyes. In the same way, that awareness is something which is a witness to everything. Now, when this happens, the next part, the first question which was asked, the first part of the question was, is it a continuous flowering, or is it one full stop, self-realized? I would say it's a continuous flowering. You know why? Because even though the full self is understood, the brain and the physical body, which has this little self, has no capacity to understand it fully at one point. So it keeps on flowering and growing. And the wonderful thing is, it has no end. Everything else has an end. Anything in this world, it has an end. Here there is no end point. It's as wide as the Milky Way. It's infinite. So, from this little self, this little flower has now grown into a garden full of different flowers. Sorry. It's flowered. And this flowering will continue. Nobody knows where it ends, which is why it's called infinite. That was a very good question.
Maybe we'll move on.
Yes, please.
Okay.
If you're happy with me, we can move on. Okay.
The other way around. Adi Shankara said knowledge alone is enough.
Who said? Adi Shankara.
Shankara said that knowledge alone is enough. But can we really get to the truth by intellectual thinking?
No. Please don't misunderstand Shankaracharya. Adi Shankara. I'm not talking about any other Shankaracharya. I'm talking about Adi Shankara, Shankar Bhagavat Pad. Often misunderstood. When Shankara said, on all his commentaries on the Upanishads, on the Gita, innumerable commentaries, by the age of 30, I don't know how many commentaries he wrote. What he meant, that knowledge is enough, is, okay, now I have to go a little bit, I'm sorry, we need to look at these questions a little more widely, so it may take a little more time. I hope it's all right. We can have another session if you don't complete it. Not this question, but other question. So, because it's such important subject, people say, oh, knowledge is enough. But then they think that because using their intellect, they can discover the truth and knowledge has come, and then no. Right. There is a mantra in the Rig Veda, one of the most important mantras in the Rig Veda, which is called the Gayatri. I know it's not in the question, but the Gayatri mantra. Young children are initiated into the Gayatri at a very young age. Now, if you look at the meaning of the Gayatri, the last part of the Gayatri, the last sentence is, Dio yona prachodayat. May my intelligence be stimulated. Right. So intelligence is important. We are not ruling out that. It is very important. However, the most intelligent person very soon discovers the limitations of the ordinary intellect. When I say ordinary intellect, let's put it this way. All the experiences we have in this world come from our five senses, right? Indriyas, eyes, nose, ear, tongue, touch. There's no other instrument that we have at the moment, generally, by which we can understand what we call knowledge. Right. Now, I'm saying that these organs of instruments of perception are very limited in their range and can sometimes be also wrong. I'm just looking at knowledge, what we mean by knowledge. Every morning we see the sunrise, but even a schoolboy will tell you that the sun neither rises nor sets. It's a world that moves. Where do we get the impression that the sun? Through our eyes. Eyes are a very important part of our perception. Yes. Now, so therefore, the five senses can only give us inputs which are at best inaccurate and sometimes at the worst even completely wrong, fallacious. Optical illusions, sound illusions. Now, if that is the case, when we say knowledge or intelligence, what we mean is the data gathered from these five senses and then processed by the mind or the brain, let's call it brain for the moment, and then produced. Now, if the data is imperfect, the knowledge that is derived from the data should also be imperfect. So, when Shankara says knowledge, he is not talking about that knowledge. This is what I am trying to say. When Shankara says knowledge, he is talking about that knowledge which cannot be found through the sense organs, which cannot be processed by the brain. It's knowledge that is instantaneously happens, going beyond the five senses, going beyond the ordinary mind. Now, there is a very ancient Upanishad called the Keno Upanishad, which comes from one of the most important Vedas called the Samaveda. The Samaveda is very important, so important that Krishna says in the Gita, among the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. He didn't say Rigveda. And Samaveda is the basis of all the music that we have in India, at least in India. It could be in other places also, I don't know much. But now the Samaveda is one of the Upanishads of the Samaveda. It's called the Keno Upanishad. It's a beautiful name. It's called WHO Upanishad. WHO. WHO. Not World Health Organization, but WHO. WHO. So, WHO Upanishad. So, one of the beautiful sentences from this Upanishad is, do I translate or use Sanskrit?
Whatever you like. We will not probably understand Sanskrit, but it would be nice to hear also the original and then maybe the translation.
Right. So, because I like the sound of it. So, the Upanishad says, Yan manasa namanyute anahur manomatam tadeva brahmatvam vidvi nedam yad idam upasate, which means that which the mind cannot reach and because of which the mind gets its capacity to function, to think. No, that alone is the truth, nothing that you worship here. This is from the Upanishad, earliest Upanishads, principal Upanishads, of which Shankara has written a beautiful commentary where he says, since the ordinary mind cannot reach, so any ordinary knowledge is of no use to find the truth. Intelligence and knowledge appears when one understands this fact, then one has knowledge. That knowledge is what Shankara is talking about, not intellectual knowledge. In that case, all great physicists who have got the Nobel Prize would have found the truth. They haven't. Maybe some have, I don't know, generally. So when he talks about knowledge, that's what he means. Understanding that ordinary knowledge cannot take one to that which is beyond the capacity of the mind even to imagine. That knowledge, if you have enough, over, chapter closed. Not the other knowledge. I could go on because there are many more questions on knowledge, because this knowledge, the subject of knowledge, has been dealt with in the Ishavasya Upanishad. I'll just state it and go to the next question. The Ishavasya Upanishad says, he who worships ignorance enters into darkness. So we all say, oh, agreed. We all know that. But the next sentence is quite a bomb. It says, he who worships knowledge enters into greater darkness. What does it mean? So now that's a bigger subject. Let's can you go into it right now? And people who think that through knowledge alone, ordinary knowledge, that one can attain the truth, are, according to another Upanishad, the Mundaka Upanishad, are people, if you know, there is an expression in English, in Shakespeare, called the blind leading the blind. You think it's from Shakespeare? Well, 1,000 years ago, the Mundaka Upanishad says, Andhaine Ivaniyamanaya Tandaha, the blind leading the blind. So, when you say knowledge, we have to look carefully. Shankara is right, but he's not talking about ordinary knowledge. Can we move to the next?
Thank you. The next question is, what is the nature of Shiva and what is the nature of Shakti?
Oh. Shakti is energy. I told you, we started with Shakti. You said Kundalini, I said Shakti. We started with Shakti. Shakti is active kinetic energy. When the kinetic energy is completely quiet and relaxed and totally silent, then it is Shivam. It is not two things. In fact, in our concept of the Shaivite literature, the Agamas, there is a deity called Ardhanarishwara, half man and half woman. Not transgender, but half man and half woman. I have nothing against transgenders, I'm just saying. So, it tries to misunderstand. So, this is half Shiva and half Shakti. So, when Shiva is, the energy called Shiva is active, then it is pure Shakti, kinetic, and it is very powerful. Which is why sometimes you see Shakti as Bhadrakali dancing on Shiva's chest, symbolically. Shiva was not pushed down, he is voluntarily laying down. Right? So, well, this happens also in human beings generally. So, Shakti is the active part, and the silent, meditative, quiet part without any disturbance is Shiva. Now, let me tell you something. The word Shivam in Sanskrit has many meanings. Shivam. Apart from the Shiva who is in the dancer's pose of Nataraja, which is the dance of creation and destruction, he is using his Shakti there. But when Shiva is silent, meditating, then Shivam means auspiciousness, bliss, and all-pervasiveness. Shiva is also called Isha, means the supreme all-pervading reality. This is Shivam. In fact, the Shaktas who worship Shakti more than Shiva say that Shiva without Shakti is a dead body. You know why do they say that? Because in Sanskrit the word Shiva has a E in the center. Shiva, right? E. Now E represents Shakti. You take E out and it becomes Shava. You know what's a Shava? A corpse. Shavasana. You get what I mean? Which is why in India, since ancient times, the feminine part of the deity is worshipped very devotionally. Because it is Shakti, it is the energy, active energy. But they complement each other. Mm-hmm.
Let's assume that I should move on, right?
Yes, we have time. I'm enjoying. I hope others are enjoying. Not getting bored.
No, we cannot get bored.
Okay.
Okay, next question is a bit personal one, I guess. Do you have any information, German neurologist mentioned in your first autobiography,
Yes.
was reborn in the 1970s, and would you recognize?
Well, I haven't seen him yet, but if I see him, I'm sure I recognize him. I haven't seen him yet. I don't know. But if he is, and if I come across him somewhere, I've traveled to Germany many times, but I haven't seen. Maybe, I'm sure he's come back. This much I can tell you. But I haven't been able to figure it out. If I see him, I'm sure I'll recognize. But one warning here. A person who is born a man need not necessarily be born a man. The soul has no sex. So perhaps he is a woman, who knows. But if I see, I would recognize.
Thank you. Okay. The next question is the following. Is there any similarity or connection between Kriya initiation and shaktipat initiation? After shaktipat, many Kriyas occur spontaneously.
Now this word shaktipat is something we need to look very, very carefully at. Unless a person has the energy and has experienced energy himself or herself, it's not possible to share with somebody else. And all shaktipat is basically planting the seed. It's just pressing the switch. It's not the whole. It's pressing the switch. The person who gives should be careful if the person is ready to take the entire energy when it is awakened. Otherwise it can go haywire. Because it is a tremendous, we are dealing with a 1,000 megaton atom bomb or something like that. So you suddenly put it into everybody, the person just burns down. I have seen such cases. People who have trouble, then they come to me and say, what can we do? We can't do. I said, relax, stop practice for a while. Okay. Now, if there is a similarity between shaktipat and kriya, for that question, I would say kriya starts with practices and moves towards experience. While if it is a direct shaktipat, it starts with experiences, then moves towards kriyas. You see what I'm trying to say? If it's a real shaktipat and the recipient is ready to receive it, then he might do kriyas by himself, which were not taught to him. While when we approach it through the Kriya Yoga Marga, then you do the kriyas consciously and then reach that, the feeling of the energy. But whatever you do, kriya or shaktipat, unless the teacher has experienced Shakti in its fullness, whatever is taught would be ineffective. 100%. So therefore, When you give Kriya, when a teacher gives you Kriya, the teacher's Shakti is already awakened. So along with the Kriya, a certain element of energy is passed on to the student. If that doesn't happen, then Kriya is like any other exercise. It doesn't mean it. Then we can teach Kriya through correspondence. Where is the Shakti out there? Does it come from the paper or from the computer? The person has to be there. So we are very particular that the person has to be there, because without that, the most important element of the energy going to the other person does not happen. So somebody takes Kriya and doesn't practice for many years, suppose. Still, when he starts practicing at some time, the whole thing comes back again. One. Second, whenever we give Kriya, we also give the Guru Mantra of Sri Guru Babaji. My Kriya, I'm talking about the Kriya that I give. There are different Kriyas in this world. The Kriya that I give, we always give first the mantra of Sri. There's a little child looking at me from there with a blue shirt. So we always give the Guru Mantra of Sri Guru Babaji to be chanted, which is actually a kind of connecting link to Babaji. Without starting with the Guru Mantra, I personally don't give any Kriya practice to anybody. Which means what? That it is linked already to an energy source. And what is shaktipat? Transferring energy from one source to another. So I think we have discussed this question now.
Thank you. I will continue reading.
Yes, please. We still have 15 minutes. I'm looking at the watch. 20 minutes.
What is Babaji's and or your advice on how to best purify the body?
Over question. Well, my advice, because I have learned from that source, having learned from that source, when I say Babaji, I refer to two people generally. I mean, not two people, two beings. One is a person, the other is a being. The primary being who we consider to be the source of Kriya is Sri Guru Babaji. We those in our lineage do not consider him as a human being with a body, but a being who has temporarily manifested a physical body, who is not born from anywhere. Now, when I refer to Babaji, I also refer to Maheshwarnath Babaji, who was a human being, a person, who was my personal guru, who was a disciple of Sri Guru Babaji. Both I call Babaji. Now, so what I have been taught, and which I teach others also. What was the question? I forgot. I thought of Babaji and forgot. What was the original question? Sorry.
What Babaji's and or your advice on how to best purify the body, mind, and the heart?
Yeah. So, how to purify the mind? We are purifying the mind because of all the clutter that has gathered. With this clutter, we cannot uncondition ourselves. So, there must be some way of doing it. First thing is to realize that it is cluttered. First step. I say that is the first step to self-realization, to realize that this self, as I know it, is cluttered, and that the clutter needs to be removed. Okay, now we start with the physical. As far as the body is concerned, the most important thing is that there should be no excesses. Gita, Krishna beautifully defines it. When he talks about yoga, he says this yoga is not for him who eats too much or eats too little, or sleeps too much or sleeps too little. It's a metaphor, which means stick to the middle path. Don't go into any excesses. Don't say I'm going to starve for 10 days and attain realization. You'll die. You won't attain realization. bring down your food, make it minimum, eat only what is required for the body. Now what is required for the body may differ with different people. Okay, so moderation is essential in all ways, in any way. Physical, food, exercise is required. Don't think that all human beings can sit down in Padmasana for days together and attain the supreme. It doesn't work. You have to purify your body. And you purify the body how? Through asanas, through exercise, through various ways. You have an entire science of yoga. Although nowadays only the asanas are taken up. People don't do anything else beyond that. Hollywood is full of asanas. But then asanas are not meant to develop your muscles. Asanas are meant to purify your body. So moderate food. As far as possible, do not use any chemicals which would interfere with your psychic energies, liquid or solid, and purify your body through asanas. Then purify your lungs and your breath and your prana through pranayama. Next step, purify your mind by doing exercises and sadhana which keep the mind properly disciplined and centered. Because the mind is so scattered. You need to center it. Without centering, you cannot go into this thing because it needs a lot of energy and attention. Centering. So that is purifying the mind. Once the mind is purified, now comes the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Patanjali says that ultimately what is required is chitta vritti nirodha, which means getting rid of all the distractions of the mind, all the movements that happen in the mind, all the waves that take place in the mind. So that is purifying the mind. Now, if you have moderate food, I prefer vegetarian food. If you do moderate food and do asanas and do pranayama, you're step by step purifying your body and mind and your prana. And when the mind becomes purified, it is free of all distractions, all movement, gone. A mind that is free of distraction no longer remains a conditioned mind. It's already open to the unconditioned, the Purusha. Let me put it another way. Suppose I'm a magnet, suppose. Another piece of iron comes to me. Here the magnet and the iron are talking. It's not possible normally. The iron comes to me and says, I also want to become a magnet. Now the moment the iron moves towards the magnet, there is some magnetism already in the iron. Even without doing anything, right? But it cannot be a permanent magnet because when it moves off, there is no magnetism. Right. So, first of all, even if you come close, the magnetism cannot be felt if there is too much rust. So what you said now, purification, is only removing the rust. When the rust is removed, the iron becomes clear and pure. Then it moves towards the magnet. And with constant being nearness to the magnet, it becomes a magnet on its own, even if this magnet is not there. So purification is the process by which we facilitate the movement of the energy from one to another. So purification is essential. There's another way of making a permanent magnet, for which also you need a clean piece of iron. Put a copper wire around it, the Kundalini snake around it, and connect it to the battery. It will become a permanent magnet. This spine. In sannyasins in India carry a piece of stick which they call the danda, yoga danda. It's a symbol of the spine which has been electrified. This is another way of making a permanent magnet. Still it requires purity. The iron has to be clean. The copper has to be the best quality. And the battery needs to have energy. I hope I am clear.
Thank you. Okay, one more question. Does Kriya initiation also lead to Kundalini?
I didn't hear your question fully. Does Kriya initiation
Also lead to Kundalini awakening?
Now, Kriya basically, when you say Kriya, the word Kriya means a method. So, Kriya Yoga is also a method. And since there must be many Kriyas in this world, when I talk about Kriya, it's a technique which has come from a certain background, from a certain tradition. That's what I mean by Kriya. Now, why is Kriya done? When you study Kriya, you'll understand that it is not merely physical exercises or breathing exercises or chanting of mantras. The idea is to clean your Sushumna. The first exercise of Kriya, apart from Guru Mantra, is how to clean the Sushumna, which is usually cluttered and filled with muck which we have gathered in this life or also in many past lives. So the first step of Kriya is to clean that muck in the spine, in the Sushumna. When this muck is cleared, then the Sushumna becomes clear. Then it becomes the straight and narrow path. Somebody said straight and narrow path. Not here in Jerusalem. The spine becomes straight and narrow and absolutely clear to walk on. Right. So when this is done, then the energy begins. When it becomes active, it goes without any obstacles. So the aim of Kriya is to take this energy from there, from the Mooladhara, and lead it to the Sahasrara. This is the aim of Kriya. So has it anything to do with the Kundalini? It's up to you to say yes or no.
Thank you. I don't know. We have like 9 minutes time, so should I ask more questions or?
Please ask me a question. Or do you want to sit quiet and meditate?
We can also do that quietly. I guess a lot of us will be happy about it.
That's nice. So we can have a common coming together of the Shakti. So we sit for 5 minutes quietly. Chant Om in your minds. Just chant Om, nothing else. Just chant Om in your minds. Just close your eyes. And when I say Hari Om Tat Sat, we can open our eyes. Right? So 1, 2, 3. Hari Om Tat Sat. Yes. Thank you very much, all of you. Well, I don't want to name everybody, but all of you. Thank you very much. We enjoyed the session because I'm sure you're all serious people. So maybe we can have a session later on because I'm sure there are many questions. Huh? We'll see how to work this out. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Namaste.